Good morning, Central Kentucky. This is Sandra Leslie White coming to you live from WJMM Studios here, just outside of Lexington. Shouting out to all of you around the country on WJMM.com and Facebook. Good morning. I was kind of really early this morning. I'm not used to being early in the morning, but my great producer, Brad, has rebuked me for being here so late. So I was early. I'm sitting here on Facebook Live waiting for the show to begin. And yeah, so here we are. Hey, have you ever played Limbo? Do you know that game, Limbo? I know I always talk about these things that date me, don't I? I mean, oh well. But, looking at the passage today, believe it or not, I looked at this colloquial, this expression, how low can you go? Well, that was actually a really innocent expression. Years ago, it was, associated with the game Limbo. And apparently, Limbo songs at one time were very popular for weddings. Well, I'm planning a wedding. Matter of fact, we're down to the wire. Miss Susanna, I'll shout out to my daughter who's getting married in about 10 days. Anyway, the Limbo started on the island of Trinidad in the 50s as a form of folk dance. The Limbo dance starts with one person on each end of a pole, holding the pole horizontally. Then a single line forms behind the pole. The Limbo dancers must pass under the horizontal pole backward at the waist without touching the pole and not touching the ground with their back. Hence, we get the word limbo to mean limber. If the dancer touches the pole, the ground, the dancer is no longer to participate in the dance. Then, as the line of limbo dancers completes the original height about shoulder height, the pole is lowered about 6 inches. Pole is lowered with each line successful passing until a winner has been declared. Yeah, and many times the song or the chant with this game, this innocent, fun game, often played at weddings, is how low can you go? So how low can you go? And of course, that's been twisted into some, creepy rap songs. And, Chris Brown, he used to be kind of sweet, and I used to like his music like long time ago in the beginning. Has a really bad one out, how low can you go? But anyway, so the twist on the truth is what we're talking about today, because how low can the Hebrew people go before God lets them go? Let's look at that today, specifically in Hosea 4:13 and 14, when we talk about the daughters. There are many directions I could go with this. I had numerous titles, but today is how low can you go, because I'm looking at a particular commentary on these passages just to see, exactly what was going on at the time. So in Hosea 4:13 and 14, the American Standard Version this morning says this: "And they offer sacrifices on the tops of the mountains and burn incense on the hills under oak, poplar, and terebinth, because their shade is pleasant. Therefore your daughters play the harlot, and your brides commit adultery. I will not punish your daughters when they play the harlot, or your brides when they commit adultery. For the men themselves go apart with harlots, and offer sacrifices with temple prostitutes. So the people without understanding are ruined." All right, if you're just tuning in, this is Sandra Leslie White lifting the veil on the Word of God, trying to get to the deeper meaning. Boy, this one really threw me off. I don't know about you. And in going through Hosea, my real mission and message is in Hosea chapter 2. I really never studied carefully on throughout the book, but that's what we're doing on Lifting the Veil, which means revelation, looking at the deeper meaning of the message of Hosea and its relevance for us today. So today's title is How Low Can You Go? Well, listen to what my, good German buddies, Keeling Diesch, commentate on this particular passage. They say God would, and this is again from their commentary on Hosea, God would not punish the daughters and daughters-in-law for their whoredom, because the elder ones did still worse. And he quotes Jerome on this. So great was the number of fornications that all punishment ceased in despair of any amendment. God turns away from the reckless nation as unworthy of being further addressed or exhorted, in righteous indignation at such presumptuous sinning, and proceed to speak about it in the third person. He proceeds to speak about this in the third person, and he quotes, for they, the fathers and husbands, not the priest, as Simpson supposes, since there is no allusion to them here. So the fathers and husbands, separate oneself, go aside for the purpose of being alone with the harlots, sacrificing with the kedeshath, i.e. with prostitutes, and they have taken its rise in the prevailing custom that the fathers of families came with their wives to offer yearly sacrifices, and the wives shared in the sacrificial meals. Comes out of 1 Samuel 1:3. Coming to the altar with whores, hitara, instead of their own wives was the climax of shameless licentiousness. A nation that had sunk so low and had lost all perception must perish. And he talks about this in that last verse in our last sentence in that verse 14, to throw down, to throw to the earth, to cast headlong into destruction. Okay, so he says again that a nation that had sunk so low and had lost all perception must perish. This is where we are with the Hebrew people. The title of the message today is How Low Can You Go? Sunk so low, they'd lost all perception of what it was like to live as a peculiar people, what it was like to live with Yahweh as their one true God, what it was like to live with one another in the Jewish tradition of morality and marriage and family and fields and prosperity and, really the promised land. There was just no understanding, no true acting out, no living out the Jewish life at this point in the northern kingdom in the latter part of the 8th century BC. For the Hebrew people had been so heavily influenced by the Canaanite gods that they were sacrificing women and young girls on the mountaintops, and then they were having intercourse, the men in the shade. We talked about that yesterday. Dark shadows, under trees the day before, and not under God. They had departed from being under God. They'd gone under the trees, into the shade, into the shadows of these great trees. And that's where they were doing their business with the temple prostitutes, both male and female. What's interesting to me is that he talks about your daughters play the harlot, your brides, meaning their wives, commit adultery, but goes on. It's important to go on here and look at the context. I will not punish your daughters when they play the harlot, or your brides, your wives, when they commit adultery. Isn't that interesting? For the men themselves go apart, meaning they go away from them, their family, to be with harlots. They offer sacrifices with temple prostitutes. So the people without understanding are ruined. So this is again, we're getting deeper and deeper into the departation of the Hebrew people from their God. And it seems to start, and I've talked about this over and over really, this seems to be kind of a slow burn. I've talked about Casting Crowns, who's coming to town tomorrow night here in Lexington. And their song, the slow burn. Sometimes the slide into sin and destruction and sure ruin is a very slow burn. And it's implicated here when we back into how this began to happen for the Hebrew people. We can go all the way back into verse 7. The more they multiplied, the more they sinned against me. And they feed on the sin of my people, direct their desire toward iniquity. It'll be like people, like priests. So it's not just the people, it's also the priests. We can look at that today, can we not? We've got to look at our leaders today, and it's just a difficult time in the kingdom. Our leaders are falling like flies. But we go back into verse 10. They eat and not have enough, so we have gluttony going on here. They play the harlot, but they don't increase. In other words, they're having, intercourse with all these temple prostitutes, but they're not increasing in their families. They've stopped giving heed to the Lord. That's why. They've stopped giving heed to the Lord. Verse 11, harlotry, he keeps going on about it. Wine and new wine, so there's alcoholism there. My people consult their wooden idols. So it goes from this, idea of eating and drinking and sex into consulting wooden idols in verse 12, and then diviners, wands, and then the spirit of harlotry leads them astray, and they begin to play the harlot, and they depart from God. It's a slow slide down. How low can we go? And once we start on that slippery slope, it's hard to stop. And they began offering sacrifices and horrific things, right? In the open air, very overt on the tops of the mountains, burning incense on the hills and then under the trees. And we've talked about that. And that's where God sees them and calls them out. But he calls out the men because they go apart from their wives, their daughters, and offer sacrifices under the dark shadows, under the shade, the darkness, in dark places. And so it's interesting to me that the daughters and the wives get caught up in this as the husbands, who are in Jewish tradition, and I think Judeo-Christian tradition too, considered the leaders of the home. They are the providers, they are the protectors, they are the priests. And when that is destroyed, when there is no protection for the family, when there is no provider, when there is no spiritual leader, then the family is affected. And that, to me, is very prevalent in our world today. So many women, wives, whether they've stayed married or not, have had to step up and be the spiritual leader in their household. But he goes to say, Yahweh does in verse 14, the men themselves go apart with harlots, offer sacrifices with prostitutes. So here's the so, summing it up. So, the people without understanding are ruined. Ooh, I don't like that. Ruined. People without understanding, it says earlier in verse 6, are destroyed for lack of knowledge, but they are ruined. They are thrown down. They are without hope when you get to this point. When you go through this slide, and the slide starts really in Hosea 4:1, and it slides all the way down into 14. And my people are ruined. So where do we go from here? Where do we go from? We can't go anywhere but up. Sometimes it's good to be ruined. Sometimes it's good. So hold on. Let's continue with this storyline tomorrow. God bless you today.